So we continue with 16.1 and choosing sides. This one is going to talk about strengths and weaknesses, strategy and goals of both sides. So on the Union side, obviously they had a much larger population than the Confederate or the Southern states. Their population was more than twice, 22 million in the North versus 9.5 in the South. And understanding that 9.5 million in the South, 3.5 of them were slaves, and they are clearly not going to be combatants or serving in the Confederate Army. Some of the other strengths that the Union had would be industry, so they had large numbers of factories. We discussed the growth of the Industrial Revolution for the last 20 or 30 years before this, so that was very helpful. They would be able to make the materials of war. So even though the population that does not of age to basically go out and serve in the Army, they could support the Army by basically making all the various needs for it. Added in there, you have natural resources like coal, which of course provides power and energy to the mills, energy to railroads. You can see the other ones. Railroads, of course, will be able to get the various supplies created in the industries throughout the North and throughout battlefields. And finally, Lincoln's leadership, the idea of his steadfast commitment to keeping the country together, even though during the commitment there was many that called for perhaps a settled peace with the Southern states as the war continued to drag on. There are some Confederate strengths. One thing that they have over the Union or Northern states is they generally have better support for the war. So even though their numbers are smaller, their support is stronger. They are fighting defensively, meaning it's not on them to invade the North and do anything. They basically have to hold on to territory. Their knowledge of the land in certain areas would be beneficial. 90-some% of the war is obviously going to occur in the South, and so they are more motivated in some ways. And their military leadership is just better as far as officers who have been to places like VMI, the Virginia Military Institute, or West Point, and have actually had real military training. Many of them are veterans of the Mexican War, and it just happened that a large number of them were Southerners who actually went to West Point. The sad and tragic thing is that they renounced their oath to basically protect the country and decided to sign up with what we would consider an enemy of the United States. So as we move on and talk about weaknesses, there it is, that lack of support. So as the war began, many people were, of course, rushing out because their fear was not in dying. Their fear was missing out on what would probably be the biggest adventure of their entire lives. So at the start, volunteers filled the ranks very quickly. But then as the war drug on, they had more and more of a problem filling those numbers in the North. Eventually, they will have to pass a draft law. The style of fighting is a weakness. As we said, they are the people on the offensive. They are going to have to invade southern states, hold and occupy those areas, and then hold them for the remainder of the war until all the southern states are defeated. The same things that are Confederate strengths are Union weaknesses. Fighting in places that they do not know. They feel they're just not as committed, perhaps. So that would be a Union weakness, too. Confederate weaknesses is basically everything that we had mentioned as a Union strength. All the material advantages was a weakness for the Confederacy. Lack of numbers, lack of industry, lack of railroads, all those types of things that they had at their issues were dealing with materials. And then the South, as far as an army, is usually outmanned at every single battle. And so those are the two strengths and weaknesses of both the Union and Confederate sides. If you were in class, this is what we would have done as a class activity. So if you want to just pause it and see if you could figure out of these 6 different strategies, which one is a Union or Northern one, and which one is a Confederate or Southern strategy. So pause the presentation right now, and then I will move on forward with the next one. So the strategy of the Union is going to be threefold. They want to blockade southern ports. The reason for doing that is they want to prevent the South from taking their agricultural goods and selling them overseas and making money and buying war materials. They also want to blockade ports because they want to stop any type of purchased war material from coming back into the Confederacy. So that's why they're going to try and blockade southern ports. That will be problematic because of the large scope and size of the South more than 3,500 miles of water needed to be blockaded. So that was in trouble. Control the Mississippi River. Remember, rivers are the highways of the 1860s, so full control of those would, of course, be very efficient and important. The other thing is that control of the Mississippi would split part of the Confederacy. It would cut off Texas and Arkansas and those areas. And finally, they understood that the war would be run out of Richmond. So if they were able to seize Richmond, they would be able to seize the Confederate leadership and hopefully end the war. Confederate strategy is going to be different. They are going to basically defend and then slowly, if necessary, give up land. But to continue the war, try and get Great Britain and France to come to their side and recognize it, much like the American colonists got France to. And then they're going to try the strategy of just dragging the war out to make it as unpleasant and unpopular as possible in the North. So the North, that has all the advantages, the one thing that they might not have in an inexhaustible supply would be the idea of commitment to it. And then last but not least is occasionally switch their tactics. Instead of fighting defensively, they would go on the offensive and actually invade parts of the North to bring about a close and an end of the war. So they do that 2 times we'll talk about. One would be in the fall of 1862. That's the Battle of Antietam, which is the single bloodiest day in all of American history. And then, of course, the other one is the summer of 1863, which is the Battle of Gettysburg, which is the largest conflict in the Western Hemisphere. It is the bloodiest battle of the entire war, lasting 3 days, more than 50,000 total casualties. So that means killed, wounded, and missing on both sides. So these are the strategies. Now, finally, the goals. Well, the goal of the Union is simply to get the country back together. As the war drags on, though, their goal is going to shift and get to a higher purpose, and that would be the ending of slavery, that they realize that this war is the opportunity to basically put a nail in the coffin of the institution of slavery. The Confederates, on the other hand, they want to be their own country. They want to win their independence just like the American colonists had done from Great Britain. The difference is they want to win their independence so they can continue a system of slavery that they feel is their inherent right. So they want to be recognized as that independent country. So those are the issues that we're talking about here, and the goals and strategy. Here at the end, I just want to take a little seconds here and talk about the typical Union soldier. Obviously, most people recognize that they're called Yankees, okay? Union soldier here, Confederate soldier, Union in blue, Confederate in gray, and so Rebs and Yankees. But I also want you to be familiar with the term that comes in front of them. So sometimes they actually refer to each other when they didn't know their names as Billy Yank and Johnny Reb. So if you've ever heard that phrase, it's sort of like a catch-all for an unknown soldier on the other side. Now, typical soldiers, most of the time, were around 25. They did get pretty young into 18, and yes, there were boys that served as young as 16 and 17. They're mostly farm boys. They spent a lot of the time in an area of 10 to 20 miles around their home. So if you look at some of these pictures, these are just kind of Union soldiers. You get an idea of them wearing these pants that eventually turn light blue. They get these light blue ones. And then you have photographs here where this is the age of photography. So once you got your nice crisp uniform, you went out with your rifle and your bayonet, and you got a nice picture to send home to mom or a sweetheart or your sister or something like that. And then the Confederates did the same thing. The idea of keeping a memento of the war.